This conversation between Rich Roll and historian and moral philosopher Rutger Bregman explores the contemporary crisis of meaning rooted in over-distraction, overconsumption, and voluntary isolation. They discuss how much talent is wasted in socially unfulfilling jobs and introduce the concept of moral ambition as a call to reorient lives towards something greater than personal gain. The dialogue touches on historical moral movements, challenges of incentive structures, the modern food system, philanthropy, technology's impact on meaning, and the potential for renewed collective action. Rutger Bregman explains moral ambition as the drive to use one's talents, privileges, and resources, be it financial, cultural, or human capital, to contribute meaningfully to the world and leave a lasting legacy. He frames it as the antidote to widespread existential crises caused by unfulfilling work and societal distractions. Moral ambition seeks to redirect ambitious, talented individuals from what he terms jobs, roles perceived as socially useless, predominantly in sectors like banking, consulting, and corporate law, toward impactful endeavors that address humanity's greatest challenges. Bregman references studies revealing that about 25% of workers in developed countries consider their jobs socially useless, a figure far exceeding unemployment rates. Notably, essential professions like teachers, nurses, and care workers are not the source of this sentiment, which is more frequent among corporate professionals in what he dubs the Bermuda Triangle of talent: finance, consultancy, and law. The lack of meaning in these roles not only wastes talent, but exacerbates psychological distress, creating fertile ground for moral ambition if properly nurtured. A major obstacle to moral ambition is the prevailing incentive system that rewards property, power, and prestige. Bregman notes that these cultural values are deeply ingrained, reinforced by advertising and societal norms, influencing career aspirations from a young age. Attempts to shame professionals into change backfire, so his approach involves inviting people to reflect on how they want to spend their limited lifetime, highlighting that a life spent in meaningless work is a poor investment of one's finite hours. Success in moral movements historically relied on making doing good prestigious and cool, a strategy that must be rekindled today to realign the honor code toward communal benefit. Bregman points to the American Freshman Survey to illustrate how cultural values have shifted over decades. In the late 1960s, 90% of students prioritized developing a meaningful philosophy of life over financial success, a figure that has since inverted. He argues that this reflects not inherent human nature, but cultural conditioning shaped by stories and propaganda. The post-World War II era fostered a solidarity-based social contract with high taxes and elite responsibility toward the collective good, which gave way in the 1970s-80s to neoliberalism and a cultural tilt toward individual selfishness, resulting in today's social contract breakdown and widespread social pathologies. Bregman shares his own youthful existential crisis, triggered by the philosophical realization that free will might be an illusion, which initially led him toward despair. He found inspiration in historical, intellectual heroes like philosopher Bertrand Russell, whose life embodied openness, courage, and moral engagement. This personal narrative highlights the vital role of role models in guiding individuals from meaninglessness toward purposeful moral ambition, demonstrating how historical exemplars can motivate present-day commitment. The conversation touches on how moral progress intertwines with expanding the moral circle, starting with the abolitionist movement that became foundational for subsequent rights movements. Bregman, reflecting on his work Humankind, explains that denying free will undercuts traditional justifications for punishment, advocating instead for rehabilitation. The abolitionist movement symbolizes a paradigm shift toward a broader, more inclusive concept of justice and empathy. Contrary to popular belief, abolitionism was initially unsuccessful in many countries except Britain, where a coalition of Quakers, evangelicals, and entrepreneurs sparked a powerful pragmatic movement beginning with a small group of committed individuals. Bregman highlights the importance of coalition building and pragmatism in effecting social change. For example, abolitionists leveraged self-interest by exposing the suffering of British sailors involved in the slave trade to gain political traction, illustrating how appealing to varied motivations can advance moral causes. The abolitionist movement also saw tensions between gradualists who favored slow incremental change and younger radicals demanding immediate abolition. This generational pushback illustrates how successful movements often balance idealism and pragmatism, a duality that contemporary activists must consider depending on context and political opportunity. Bregman stresses the necessity of reframing moral ambition to make it prestigious and attractive, especially among ambitious professionals. The younger generation is increasingly oriented toward meaningful impact, signaling a possible cultural shift. By positioning doing good as a high-status, aspirational lifestyle, movements can harness ambition for social progress rather than personal enrichment alone. In response to wasteful career patterns, Bregman co-founded the School for Moral Ambition, aiming to redirect exceptional talent toward critical global challenges. The school recruits students and mid-career professionals from elite institutions like Harvard and competitive industries, offering selective fellowships that emphasize commitment and exclusivity. The program trains participants in team building, prioritization of solvable global problems, and pragmatic activism, steering them away from passion-based career myths toward impactful work. Following a Gandalf to Frodo analogy, the school emphasizes aligning individuals with pressing global priorities determined by rigorous triple S criteria: sizable, solvable, and neglected problems. While passion develops over time as a byproduct of engagement, the initial focus is on joining movements that address crucial issues such as food system transformation or public health crises like tobacco control. Bregman discusses the evolution of a corporate professional turned social entrepreneur who shifted from focusing on individual aid to addressing malaria, the leading killer of children globally. This story exemplifies how effective altruism applies strategic, evidence-based interventions like insecticide-treated mosquito nets to save lives at scale, illustrating the power of purpose-driven transformation beyond individual acts of charity. While expressing skepticism about much modern philanthropy, as often being PR-driven or greenwashing, Bregman acknowledges exceptions where wealthy individuals fund meaningful causes. He praises effective altruism's core commitment of moral seriousness and real sacrifice, highlighting donors who give significant portions of income or even kidneys. However, he criticizes parts of the movement for relying excessively on guilt and moral blackmail, which may alienate rather than inspire, advocating instead for a balance with enthusiasm. Bregman critiques earn-to-give strategies that encourage pursuing lucrative careers solely to donate wealth, pointing to scandals that marred effective altruism's reputation. Nevertheless, he praises that movement's rigor in evaluating cause effectiveness and its potential for channeling resources to high-impact interventions, situating it as a modern analog to historical Quaker philanthropy. Bregman identifies factory farming as a 21st-century moral atrocity comparable to historic injustices, emphasizing its scale of animal suffering, slaughtering 80 billion animals yearly, outnumbering humans since the dawn of time within a short period. He recounts his own transition from a committed carnivore to vegetarianism after confronting uncomfortable facts about industrial animal agriculture's cruelty, genetic manipulation, and environmental devastation. The podcast details how factory farming depends on intensive supplementation of vitamin D, antibiotics, and genetic engineering to sustain vast indoor populations, revealing technological innovations designed primarily for profit that exacerbate suffering. Bregman stresses the dissonance between pastoral myths of farming and harsh industrial realities, noting the exploitation of both animals and farmers trapped in corporate systems. Drawing parallels with the abolitionist movement, Bregman warns against purist, radical strategies like the free produce movement, which failed due to exclusivity and high consumer sacrifice. Modern advocates recognize the importance of broad coalitions, including partial vegans, health-conscious eaters, environmentalists, and even meat eaters dissatisfied with factory farming. Embracing multiple entry points, health, climate, economics, builds a diverse and influential movement. Bregman praises activists who engage pragmatically with corporations by leveraging consumer pressure and shifting markets toward cage-free eggs and alternative proteins, acknowledging modest but meaningful progress. He emphasizes the importance of industry partnerships, innovation hubs like the Good Food Institute, and technological advances to accelerate a food system transition that benefits people, animals, and the environment alike. For individuals inspired to act, the School for Moral Ambition offers accessible programs and small group moral ambition circles worldwide to foster commitment without requiring elite credentials. Fundraising efforts include matched donations to expand fellowships focused on food system reform, indicating a strong pool of interested participants and host organizations eager to collaborate on transformative work. Bregman reflects on America's deep-rooted tension between a narrow, individualistic notion of liberty, leave me alone, and a richer conception involving voluntary commitment and sacrifice for collective good. Using marriage and historical movements as examples, he argues that meaningful freedom involves binding oneself to purpose, community, or moral cause, a path that has historically yielded social progress and can guide current efforts. Drawing lessons from American history, Bregman compares today's social and economic disparities with those of the late 19th century. The eventual emergence of a progressive era with grassroots organizing and elite reformers illustrates a dual approach needed now. He warns of growing social apathy and political polarization that risk illiberal outcomes unless balanced by a revival of engaged, hopeful activism. The discussion turns to the corrosive effects of technology and social media on communal life, drawing parallels to the temperance movement that sought to curb alcohol abuse. Bregman proposes a neo-temperance movement aimed at reclaiming humanity and attention from addictive platforms, tempered by lessons from history like Prohibition's failures. He acknowledges widespread desire for regulation and reform of digital technologies amid rapidly shifting societal dynamics. Historic and contemporary social changes often stem from relatively small, dedicated groups rather than mass movements. Citing Margaret Mead's famous notion, Bregman urges listeners to find their path to moral ambition, not necessarily through grand gestures, but by joining committed communities focused on meaningful impact. He reinforces that fulfillment emerges from service to causes larger than oneself, offering a compelling alternative to status-driven, consumption-focused lives.